When Keanu Reeves walks onto the set of the Steve Harvey show, the energy is light, the audience expects charm, laughs, and maybe a few behind-the-scenes stories from Hollywood. And Steve, he's ready to guide the conversation with his usual humor and heart. But as Keanu takes his seat and notices the crucifix on Steve's chest, something shifts: the tone, the air, the purpose. What begins as a friendly interview is about to become something deeper, because in the next few minutes, Steve Harvey won't be the one asking the questions. He'll be the one trying to hold back tears. What Keanu says will change everything, and it starts with just one unexpected sentence. "Can I tell you something I've never revealed in public? Oh, and before we take off, tell us, where are you reading this from? We love seeing your reactions." The studio lights dimmed slightly as the crowd settled, the anticipation palpable in the air. The familiar rhythm of Steve Harvey's theme song faded as he walked across the stage with that iconic half grin of his cue cards in hand, eyes full of warmth. Tonight was different from the very first second. Steve knew it. The energy felt less like entertainment and more like something sacred was about to unfold. With his voice full of admiration, Steve introduced his guest not just as a Hollywood star, but as something rarer a soul people felt connected to without ever having met. The media calls him the kindest man in Hollywood, Steve announced. Seto, a chorus of applause. The internet says he's the last good guy left. Me, I say, he's the realest example of grace I've ever seen. The crowd roared as Keanu Reeves stepped onto the stage, dressed in his usual understated, styled dark jeans, a black shirt, and a plain blazer. Nothing flashy, just him. He waved, briefly smiled softly, and gave a slight nod, visibly uncomfortable with the overwhelming attention as he sat down beside Steve. The energy in the room shifted againless. Show more truth. There was no rush, no performance, just presence. Keanu spoke quietly, almost as if trying not to disturb the peace in the room. He thanked the audience, then admitted, half laughing, half shy, that this kind of reception always caught him off guard. "I'm just a guy trying to do his best," he said. Steve landed with a grin. "That's exactly what makes you special." They began to talk not just about film roles and Hollywood gossip, but about humanity, about kindness, about what it meant to move through the world without armor, even when the world gave you every reason to wear it. Steve brought up Keanu's reputation, the videos of him giving up his subway seat, helping crew members on set, giving away portions of his salary to support stuntmen, camera operators, even makeup artists. All true, Keanu confirmed, but hadn't seen them as grand acts to me, he said gently. "It's just the right thing to do." He spoke with a sort of quiet wisdom, never dramatic, never self-important. And the audience was hanging on every word. Everybody's going through something. He added, "Sometimes the smallest gesture can change someone's entire day." Steve nodded deeply, moved. There was something humbling about hearing those words from someone who had every reason to detach, to hide behind status and fame, yet Harvey was bare, honest, open. The conversation turned to contrast, how someone who had seen so much success could remain so grounded. "I guess I've always felt that none of this is promised," Keanu said. "I've lost a lot, and when you lose people you love, when life shakes you to the core, you realize that none of this known of it makes you better than anyone." He paused for a moment, his eyes drifting off camera, maybe into a memory. "I grew up moving around a lot." He continued, "Born in Lebanon, raised in Canada. My father left when I was young. My sister battled leukemia. I lost my partner, I lost a child, and still, I'm here every day as a choice you either let pain harden you, or you let it shape you into someone." Softer, the words settled like a weight on the room. You could feel it. People holding their breath, reflecting on their own pain. Steve visibly moved to touch the small crucifix that hung around his neck. He didn't say anything at first, just let his fingers rest there, quiet, acknowledging something only he could feel. "You talk about silence like it's familiar," he finally said. Keanu nodded. "It is. Silence has been my companion for a long time, but in that silence, as he means, I hear the clearest things." Steve leaned back slightly, his voice softening. "You ever hear God in that silence?" For the first time in the interview, Keanu paused, really paused. Then he looked Steve directly in the eyes. "Yes," he said, "I believe in something greater. I've questioned it. I've walked away from it. I felt alone, but even in the deepest darkness, I could feel something, a presence, a peace, not always loud, not always comforting, but always there. Steve's hand closed around the crucifix. That's faith, he said quietly, even if it doesn't have a name, even if it's just something you feel. Keanu looked at the cross now, his expression shifting. He leaned forward slightly, he most hesitating, like he was about to step off a ledge. Steve, he said, his voice lower now, full of something different, something deeper. Can I tell you something I've never said out loud before? Steve didn't speak, he just nodded. Keanu took a breath, a long, intentional breath. There was a night. He began a few years ago. I was in a really dark place. Couldn't move, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I wasn't even sure. I wanted to be alive. Everything felt empty. The audience was dead. Silent, I was scrolling through my phone, he continued, just trying to distract myself, trying to feel something, and I came across a video. It was you talking about purpose, about faith, about how God doesn't waste pain. Steve froze back. It wasn't just what you said, Keanu added, it was how you said it, like you'd lived it, and you were wearing this crucifix, this exact one. And I remember thinking, this man believes in something bigger. Maybe I can too. Steve slowly looked down at the cross on his chest, Thing's fingers tightening around it. I watched that clip 3 times. Keanu whispered, and the next morning, for the first time in weeks, I got out of bed, hesitated back slowly, almost as if the memory itself had weight. I've never told anyone that, said, but I've carried your words with me ever since. Steve didn't speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice cracked. I just talked from the heart. He said, I had no idea. Keanu interrupted him gently. That's just it. You didn't have to know. That's what made it real. You weren't trying to inspire. You were just being yourself, and that saved me. There was emotions welling in Steve's eyes now. The studio lights reflected off a tear that escaped down his cheek, and that crucifix yower. Keanu said, his voice now full of reverence. It's not just a symbol, it's a sign, a message. You think you're just a comedian with faith, but Steve, I think you're something else. Steve looked at him, confused but open. I think you're a minister in disguise. Keanu said, and I have something else to tell you, something that might change your life the way you changed mine. The studio is silent. Even the cameras seemed to pause, and Steve, still holding the cross around his neck, whispered one word, I'm listening. There was a silence on stage that didn't feel like television anymore. A pause between laughs. Not a dramatic beat, it was something else. Something deeper. The kind of silence fit only shows up when truth steps into the room. Keanu Reeves had just leaned into words. Steve Harvey eyes, sincere voice, soft but unwavering. Can I tell you something I've never revealed in public? He had asked, and Steve, surprised but steady, had given him space. No, Keanu sat back in his chair, adjusting slightly, like someone about to open a door that had remained closed for too long. The audience was utterly still. No whispers, no fidgeting, just pure human attention. Keanu took a slow breath. His eyes didn't wander. They stayed locked on Steve. But what he was seeing was far away. There was a season in my life, he began, when I couldn't find a reason to wake up. Steve didn't flinch, but his body stilled, as if his soul had leaned forward. I had lost people, Keanu continued, not just to death, to life, told time to pain, one after the other. His voice was calm, but each word seemed to echo off the walls of something buried in me. Daughter was stillborn, he said gently, and just a few weeks later, lost Jennifer. She was the closest thing I had to home. He paused, then looked down at these hands for a moment. I don't think I cried right away. Grief isn't always loud. So many times it's quiet. So quiet you forget you're alive. The audience sat breathless. Some leaned forward, some leaned into themselves. I kept working, he said. Kept doing interviews, kept playing roles. It's easier to disappear behind a character than to be yourself when yourself is broken. Steve's fingers found crucifix around his neck again, not for show, just instinct, just grounding. But eventually, Keanu went on. The noise outside couldn't drown out the silence inside. And one night that silence almost won. Steve tilted his head, his eyes searching Keanu's face for what was coming. It was late. Keanu said, I was alone. I hadn't slept in days. I didn't want to eat. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to be asterisk. So, is that there, in the dark, just sitting for hours, a long pause, no prayers, no thoughts, just the thought after all thoughts? That kind of emptiness, then something in his tone shifted barely in thoughts. When it happened, he said, I picked up my phone. Just scrolling, not looking for anything, just trying not to feel. He breathed in slowly, and I saw a clip. It was you, Steve. Blinked, visibly caught off guard. You were on stage. Keanu said, talking about storms, about how cadosant waist pain, about how sometimes the thing that's breaking you is actually breaking you open. Steve nodded slowly. He remembered the moment. I don't know why I stopped scrolling, Keanu admitted. But I watched the whole thing, Gind. Then I watched it again. His voice cracked just slightly. You said a fear. Was a long pause, not awkward, not uncomfortable, just full of what had been said, full of what hadn't yet been said then. Steve spoke, his voice lower than before. You know, sometimes I wonder if I've done enough, he admitted, if all this comedy hosting. Speaking actually asterisk means asterisk something. Keanu leaned in slightly. It does. I'm living proof. Steve shook his head, overwhelmed. I was just trying to survive, man. I was in trying to save anyone, and that, Keanu said, is exactly why you did the. Audience stirred, small sounds of emotion breaking through the stillness. A few people wiped their eyes. Others simply sat in quiet reverence. Steve looked out toward the crowd, then back at Keanu. You said something changed in you when you saw that video. He said, what was it? Keanu sat with the question for a moment, then replied, hope. He said that maybe the silence wasn't the end of my story. That maybe God still had something for me to do. He looked directly at Steve again, and seeing that crucifix on your chest while you spoke about divine purpose. It wasn't just a coincidence, it was confirmation. A quiet reminder that light finds a way in, even through screen. Steve nodded slowly, visibly moved. You reminded me. Keanu added that he wasn't forgotten, that my story wasn't over. He paused again, letting the moment breathe. And I remember exactly what you said, Steve, word for word. I've carried it with me for years, and tonight I need to say it back to you because maybe you've forgotten how powerful it really is. Steve looked at him, a question forming in his eyes. Keanu took a deep breath, eyes steady. Sometimes you're not Theon being rescued. You're the one doing the rescuing, and you don't even know it. Steve's lips trembled slightly. You'll think you're just talking, but you're actually testifying. Keanu leaned back, slightly giving the moment space to land. Space to land. Steve covered his face with his hands for a second. Then he looked up, eyes glistening. You remembered all that? He hissed. I needed to, Keanu said, simply because I wasn't just hearing you. I was being lifted by you. Steve sat back in his chair, hands clasped now as if trying to hold himself together. The room felt like it had shifted again, more than just a stage, more than just a show. It felt like healing was happening right there under the lights. Keanu's voice came one last time, softer than before, and maybe you didn't hear this enough, but Steve, you matter not for what you do, but for who you are. You carried faith into place where people had none left, including me. Steve couldn't respond right away. Hisses rose and fell with slow, emotional breaths. The moment was quiet, until Keen wedded almost in a whisper. And today, I have something to tell you that might change your life just like you changed mine. Steve looked up, and the entire studio held its breath for a long moment. Steve Harvey said nothing. He simply sat there, absorbing everything. Keanu had just shared the gratitude, the testimonieth truth. Then slowly, Keanu leaned forward again. This time with a differentiance, as if what he was about to say didn't come from memory, but from something sacred. I remember every word off that message, he said. And I want to say them back to you now, not just as a reminder, but as a mirror. Steve's eyes locked on his unmoving, and then with calm reverence, Keanu began to recite. God doesn't always use the mighty or the perfect. Sometimes he picks the broken, the ones nobody expects, because if they know how to reach people the strong can't. Steve blinked. Slowly, the words washing over him like a tide he'd forgotten how to stand against. You don't need a pulpit to preach. You don't need a robe to be called. You don't need to carry the word. Keanu's voice didn't waver. He wasn't quoting a clip no more. He was delivering a message. Sometimes your pain is your ministry, and sometimes your comedy is just the disguise God uses to send people hope. Steve's lips parted, but no sound came out. He was completely undone. Then Keanu looked at him gently like, leaving a revelation instead of a compliment. You thought you were just making people laugh, he said. But you were redoing more than that. You were reaching hearts. You were saving lives. You were carrying light. They let those words settle bare. Adding the one line that would break Steve's composure, "You're a minister." Well, Steve, you just happened to wear a suit instead of a collar. Steve's head dropped, one hand went to his face. The other gripped the cross at his chest. Tears spilled freely now, no shame, no restraint. The audience didn't move. No applause, just silence. Sacred, still, holy silence. And then Keanu said, something goes soft, almost fragile. "The way you carry that crucifix, it's not just a symbol, Steve, it's a signal, and tonight, I think, it's pointing at something bigger than both of us." Steve looked up. Tears still falling, Keanu inhaled deeply as if steadying himself for what came next. "Becco's tonight. I have something to tell you, something that may change your life." Steve's expression shifted, equal parts fear and awe. Keanu leaned in, voice quiet but certain. "Like you changed mine." Steve wiped his face slowly, his hand trembling slightly as he lowered it from his eyes. The tears hadn't fully stopped, but now they mingled with a kind of stillness, a reverence that made even the lights on set seem softer. Keanu sat quietly across from him, as if waiting for the right moment to speak, and then, with a gentle kale, said, "It, Steve, there's something I need to tell you, a sentence that's lived inside me for years, and I've never said it out loud until now." Steve nodded, slowly, his eyes searching because his voice was barely above a whisper. "Go ahead." Keanu leaned forward. There was no performance in his voice, only truth God uses His chosen ones. He began, even when they think they're ageist, telling jokes. Steve blinked, not moving. Keanu continued, "You thought you were? Just entertaining, just trying to bring people joy. But, Steve, you were saving lives." A single tear slipped down Steve's cheek again. This one different. This one carried understanding. Keanu nodded, confirming it with a look that said, "This is real. You saved mine," he said softly. And for a moment no one in the room breathed. Even the cameras felt like they bowed their heads. Steve leaned back, a sound escaping his lips, part laugh, part sob, part disbelief. "I was just trying to make it, man," he said, "trying to get through my pain like everybody else." Keanu nodded again. "Exactly, that's what made it holy." The words lingered, deep, permanent. Then something happened that no one expected. Steve stood up, his body shook, not from weakness, but from something else. MLSM sacred. He didn't speak. He simply touched the crucifix again and stared at Keanu. Keanu stood still, fast off face with Steve Harvey, both men now on their feet. The studio was frozen in team. Steve had just asked a question that came not from doubt but from deep, aching wonder. "Why me?" And Keanu had answered without hesitation. "I'll tell you, he didn't rush." He let the air carry silence, as if inviting heaven itself into the conversation. "Because God chooses the unlikely." Keanu it said gently, "the ones who've been overlooked, the ones who've bled quietly behind the curtain. Hecus's people who felt pain because they know how to speak to the pain of others." Steve didn't move, his eyes glistened with something older than tears, something sacred. "You're not the loudest," Keanu continued. "You're not the most polished. You didn't go to seminary, you didn't memorize scripture, but God saw your scars and trusted you with a microphone anyway." And then, in the middle of that quiet storm, Steve whispered, "But why me?" His voice cracked open on those two words. "Why me, man? Out of everybody God could have used, why would he pick me?" Keanu stood up too, his eyes steady, and said nothing for a moment. Then he took a step closer, stopping just in front of Steve, and replied, "I'll tell you." The camera pushed in slowly. The audience didn't move. No one said a word because they knew whatever Keanu was about to say next wasn't just for Steve. It was for all of them. Why would he pick them? Steve asked. Keanu stepped forward. "I'll tell you." The crowd was still. Some wept silently. Some held hands. No one reached for their phones. No one wanted to leave this moment. Steve finally let out a soft breath. His voice was cracked but steady. "I've thought about quitting before," he said, walking away from the spotlight, from all of it. Keanu nodded, as if he already knew. "I have too." He replied more than once. They both sat back down now, not because the moment passed, but because it had deepened, shifted, settled. Steve leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes far off. "I've asked God more than once, 'What do you want from me?' he said sometimes. I feel like I'm not good enough to speak on faith, not clean enough, not consistent. Enough, Keanu nodded, again his voice soft and certain, and that's exactly why he chose. Yusuf looked up because your voice doesn't sound like a preacher's. Keanu said it sounds like someone who's been through. It's someone who knows what it's like to lose, to struggle to cry in the dark. There was no applause, no music, just presence then. Steve looked at Keanu, eyes sharp with something else now. Something searching. You really believe, he asked, that we can still have faith in a world like this? The question hung in the air, heavy, timeless, and the way Keanu looked back at him calm. Sure, almost glowing with something beyond himself, told everyone in the room that what he was about to say next would not be forgotten. Siv asked, "Do you really believe we can still have faith in a world like this?" Keanu looked at him ready, Tonza. And what he said next would become one of the most replayed lines in television history, Steve's questioningly, ard in the air like incense. "Do you really believe we can still have faith in a world like this?" Keanu didn't answer right away. He simply looked at Steve calm but intense, as if the words need dead toe form in his soul before they reached his lips. Then finally he spoke, "I believe faith is the only thing that isn't pretending." Steve tilted his head, listening. In Hollywood we fall.